Hello, and welcome to Crystal Queer's Pride mini-series, our inaugural video podcast. This is a project of Crystal Queer in cooperation with Social Tinkering, a human connection project. We are so excited about this project and to begin working towards more inclusivity for LGBTQIA youth and adults. I am Andrew Richardson. I'm a 25-year-old native Vermonter. I am a case manager at Spring Lake Ranch in Cuttingsville, Vermont, and I am a graduate of Castleton University with a degree in forensic psychology. I graduated in 2018. I am doing this because I greatly believe in the community in Rutland County and would like to see more support for the LGBTQIA community within Rutland County.
And I am Jeanette Langston. I'm a middle-aged mom, a wife, and a woman who has lived all over this country, and I actively participate in the LGBTQIA community. I'm the founder and executive director of Social Tinkering, a human connection project. Our mission is to help build thriving communities by empowering connections and growing happiness. I am doing this with Andrew in partnership to help elevate the LGBTQIA+ community. The more people are seen, the more they feel heard, the more they feel supported, and the more they feel like they belong.
Yeah. So, for each episode in this mini-series, it will be hosted by myself with different guests for different conversational topics. And Jeanette and I will also be working in partnership at various times to produce this video podcast.
So Andrew and I met about a year ago during COVID on Zoom, and we started talking about the idea of creating a video podcast around the LGBTQIA subject. We wanted to have real-life conversations that kind of broke down the subject into brief segments, and where we could start with the easier stuff and then build up to the more difficult, more complicated stuff over time.
Our goal for this podcast is to help people to see that even though gender and sexuality might be complicated to understand at times, that we can have open conversations and learn from and with each other.
So this podcast is for anyone who wants to learn more about the LGBTQIA community. We're starting out really basic to help everyone get on the same page. We recognize that not everyone has had the same life experiences or education, and that sometimes when talking about social issues, we can tend to jump to the deeper stuff really fast without starting with the simpler stuff. That can make learning this topic about any of these social issue topics really intimidating for people to step into the conversation to learn, and that actually prevents people from being part of the conversation and from learning. So we want to make things less intimidating and easier to start learning about. So by starting with the basics, we hope to create a space where people feel welcome to listen, to learn, and grow so that we might all better support each other as allies and as LGBTQIA community members.
So for episode 1, we chose to focus on terms and definitions in order to keep things smooth and simple and easy to start. So this is for anybody who may need a refresher on the known terminology. We understand, too, that learning this LGBTQIA terminology and the definitions that come with it, that can feel really overwhelming. And so we hope that, by doing this, we can at least create a list to help increase understanding, especially for younger allies and younger LGBTQIA community members. So we hope that this might also be used as a resource to show or to send to people who LGBTQIA folks either are not or are working with to help understand what being an ally really means. So for terms and definitions, we were hoping to talk about the LGBTQIA acronym first and what it really means. So we're going to start first with 2 phrases, which is gender identity and sexual identity.
So gender identity is the gender you identify as, male, female, non-binary, transgender, etc. And sexual identity has more to do with who you are attracted to. I think of it along the lines of, if you were dating, who would you be willing to date based on gender?
So first off, we're going to give, like I said, a more in-depth description of the acronym LGBTQIA. So this acronym stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersexual, and asexual. So another note is that the A in this acronym can also be used with ally, and the Q can also be used for questioning. One of the things that we've realized is that a lot of people feel like they're allies, but they don't necessarily know the language or know how to properly and politely insert themselves into being that supportive role. For example, they don't want to mess up and say the wrong thing, like your name or your pronouns, and they don't want to hurt somebody. And on the flip side, someone who uses pronouns such as they, them, could rightfully be frustrated when they need to explain to them or to the person who is having a trouble with pronouns. I lost my place. They don't want to explain it to them all the time. So one of the ways that we can show that we're good allies is that we can learn how to say the acronym correctly. We can learn what it means and why that's important. It's a simple thing, but trying to say the LGBTQIA acronym correctly shows a person that they are seen and that they care enough to learn a little bit about them. So some acceptable ways to use the acronym are LGBTQ+, LGBT, or LGBTQIA.
So, Andrew, what about the word queer? Can an ally or can people use the term queer?
The answer is yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. The term queer was used in the past as a homophobic slur, but in the recent decades, it has been reclaimed by the community as a positive blanket term for the overall LGBTQIA acronym. So yeah, queer is good.
All right, so now before we get into each letter of the acronym, we're going to talk about what exactly an ally is, because I think some people, think they're allies. I've had a lot of conversations with folks that are like, I like gay people, or I like LGBT people. I don't have a problem with anybody. But at the same time, they're not necessarily saying the acronym correctly. They haven't taken the time to learn that. They don't really understand how critical it is to do simple actions and statements that show people that they do care and that they do support folks, and just how far feeling supported and knowing people care can go for a person who is trying to figure out their identity or trying to come out as who they truly feel they are. And so that's why we want to talk about allyship a little bit. We'll have an entire video podcast about that at the end of June, but right now we're just going to define the term ally a little bit. And so ally is a term that's used to describe someone who is actively supportive of the LGBTQIA community and people. It incorporates straight and cisgender allies, we'll get into cisgender, as well as other LGBTQIA community members who support each other. So for example, an ally can be a lesbian who is an ally to the bisexual community as well.
Speaking of lesbians, that is our first term. So, lesbian is a term for a person or for a woman who is emotionally, romantically, or sexually attracted to other women. Women and non-binary people may use this term to describe themselves.
And then we have the letter G for gay, a person who is emotionally, romantically, or sexually attracted to members of the same gender. This is a widely used term that encompasses males, females, and non-binary folks for self-identifying. Mm-hmm. So the next letter is B for bisexual, and that describes someone who has the potential for romantic or emotional or sexual attraction to people of the female or male genders. Bisexual people usually identify as male or female for their gender, but not always.
Okay. Next, we have the T, transgender, which here I'm also going to define cisgender, as Jeanette had said earlier. So cisgender is a term used to describe a person whose gender identity aligns with the sex that was assigned to them at birth. Comparatively, transgender, which I forgot to mention this earlier, which is the term that I fall under in the LGBTQIA community. Transgender is an umbrella term that is used to define a person whose gender identity and or their gender expression is different from cultural expectations that were assigned to them at birth. Being transgender does not imply any sexual orientation, because we know now that gender and sex are two separate entities altogether.
And so the next letter is Q, which we said earlier can be used for queer or questioning. This is a term that's used to describe people who are in the process of exploring their sexual orientation or gender identity.
Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to note that questioning is a term questioning is something that happens at any time. We think of sometimes specific example of a young child who is identifying as transgender or who is discovering that about themselves. And so we think about that sometimes, but also questioning can last all your life. It can come in different variations and different intensities.
Yeah, and I've had lots of conversations with friends who, we've kind of realized over time that gender identity, sexual identity, those are things that can be fluid too, because, just like anything else as human beings, we learn and grow. We learn and grow as individuals inside ourselves. We learn a lot more about ourselves over time. And so that, can apply to our gender identity and sexual identity too. So it's, questioning throughout the life and changing how you feel or you realize things about yourself is cool too. So,
yeah. Our next term is intersex. Intersex people are born with a variety of differences in their sex traits and their reproductive anatomy. There is a wide variety of differences among intersex variations, including differences in genitalia, chromosomes, gonads, internal sex organs, hormone production, hormone response, and/or secondary sex traits such as facial hair or more of a slender feminine face shape.
Last is the A, and that stands for asexual. And asexual means the lack of sexual attraction or desire for other people. And as we mentioned earlier, A can also stand for ally.
So there's our acronym, Lgbtqia. But we also wanted to add a few other terms and definitions that you definitely will hear. So here they are. The first one is gender dysphoria or gender euphoria. Mm-hmm. Gender dysphoria is a clinically significant distress that is caused when a person's birth gender is not the same as the one to which they identify. Gender dysphoria, as sort of previously stated, is kind of a bad and negative term. But on the flip side, euphoria is a distinct enjoyment or satisfaction caused by the correspondence between a person's gendered features that align with their true gender. Mm-hmm. So using the example of a trans person, it might start in the beginning that you have a lot of gender dysphoria, and as you take steps, if transitioning medically is something that you want, doesn't always have to happen, but if you choose to take that path, your dysphoria can sometimes change to be euphoria as different parts of your body more align with how you see yourself and who you are really.
Yeah.
So dysphoria is sometimes bad, euphoria, good stuff.
Some other terms we wanted to talk about are non-binary. You probably heard that a lot. Gender non-conforming and gender queer. So these are broad phrases that refer to people who do not behave in a way that conforms to the traditional expectations of gender, or whose gender expression does not fit neatly into any specific category. And so while many also identify as transgender, not all gender non-conforming people do identify as transgender. Gender queer people, who typically reject notions of static categories of gender and embrace fluidity of gender identity, and often, though not always, sexual orientation. Those who identify as genderqueer may see themselves as being both male and female, neither male nor female, or as falling completely outside those categories. So you can tell I'm reading off the paper a lot as I'm reading this. Obviously, this is something we don't talk about very much as a society. It's not something that comes naturally to us to talk about, but it's just one more of these things that the more we talk about it, the more we understand each other, and the more we can treat each other with respect and support.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah. And our last term and definition for you all is pansexuality. This describes somebody who has the potential for emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to any gender, though not necessarily simultaneously happening at the same time. This doesn't always happen in the same way or to the same degree. It's different for every person. People who identify as pansexual more typically might identify with any of the options of gender identity, which comparatively some people use synonymously bisexuality and pansexuality. Just like with gender and sex, those two things are different. Mm-hmm. So it's important when you're doing your research to look for those subtle differences between the terms.
Yeah. And lastly, we want to just touch on pronouns a little bit. And so pronouns, for example, they, them, she, her, he, him. Pronouns, you can just ask first if you're not sure. People really appreciate it if you just ask. And if you mess up, that's totally cool, but you just keep correcting yourself and keep trying, and don't make a big deal and then just continue on. Just do your best to be respectful when it comes to pronouns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So by no means are Jeanette and I experts on this subject. We are speaking on individual bases separate from my employer. These are our own lived experiences and opinions. So, we've done our research and we've used our resources to the best of our abilities, and we just want to use those things to help articulate the information that we're giving to you as accurately as possible.
If you have any comments or questions about this episode or about this podcast, feel free to email us and we'll do our best to answer. Again, we are not experts and we are not trained therapists or psychologists. We are a couple of people with different lived experiences trying to help people understand each other better. We're doing this project while trying to show the utmost respect to where everyone is at in the learning process. We expect viewers to be respectful in return. If you're not, your comments will be deleted and you will be blocked.
So lastly, to wrap up this podcast, I was hoping to just give a little plug for Crystal Queer. We are a pretty new group that has formed, and Jeanette has been so supportive enough to hold us underneath the umbrella of social tinkering as a partnership. So if you're looking for Crystal Queer in the future, you can find that at Jeanette's social tinkering website page. We will also be, working towards the same goals and creating lasting community and creating inclusivity. So keep an eye out online, and we'll also be doing other, like as you said, other topics. So our next topic will be taking some time to dive into the history of the LGBTQ community. We're going to go back as far as we can with the best resources that we can find. And so hopefully you'll be able to tune in and check that video out as well.
Be a short, brief history. Obviously not experts, but it'll be a good summary of kind of why we still need to have Pride Month, why we need to care, why it's important to show through words and actions that you support the LGBT community still. And so, social tinkering is doing this, again, just because we want to help people feel supported. It can be very isolating being a member of the LGBTQIA+ community, especially in rural communities. And as rural communities work to, understand diversity, equity, and inclusion more, social tinkering wants to help with that by just elevating these kind of conversations to show people that we support everyone, that we can start to build a little trust. When we trust, we can feel like we belong more in a place, in a space, and with others, and that ultimately will grow happiness. So thank you for being here with us today.
And happy Pride.
Yeah, yay, happy Pride.